Over to you.
Here we go.
Correct. Okay.
We good. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm James Heimowitz. I'm the president of China Institute, and it's just a delight to welcome you all to today's what promises to be a really interesting program. I was just chatting with the moderator and the presenters just now. What I started to say was, you know, China Institute has been around for 95 years now, trying to help Americans have better understanding and insight into China through its culture, through its language, through its art, through the way it does business. And these are really tough times. These are times when trust is really at a deficit. And the only way that we build trust and build understanding is through connecting at a human level. And I was talking and saying, you know, what could be more core to any culture than its food and the way that it eats? And I was talking and thinking about my own connection to China Institute, which lasts almost five decades now, because my grandmother took Chinese cooking lessons at the China Institute when they offered cooking lessons in the late 1950s. And I think about how much has happened about America's understanding of China through its food and through its cuisine. And I'm so excited and so delighted to have this program and also to be thinking about our future. And I just wanted to share with you, part of our future is going to be a Center for Contemporary China downstairs, which we're currently on pause building out. But very core to that, we hope, is going to be a culinary and cuisine component to everything that we think about when we think about contemporary China. Well, not everything, but at least a core element there. Anyway, you guys didn't come hear me to come to listen to me. You came to hear this exciting panel. So let me hand it over to our head of programs, Dinda Elliott, who again has pulled together an amazing group of people, and I'm looking forward to listening. So why don't I hand it over to you, Dinda?
Great, thank you, James. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're excited to say we have more than 100 people tuned in, and one of the really nice things about this terrible crisis that we're facing is that in some ways it's opened up a new opportunity for us, and we're proud to say we've moved all of our programs online and our whole school online, and we are now able to reach audiences, you know, more broadly than ever before. And this is the second program of our Beyond COVID series. Last week we had Kishore Mahbubani and Graham Allison, two great public intellectuals, talking about Has China Won? And we also had more than 100 people tune into that. You can watch that fascinating discussion on China Institute's YouTube channel. Next Tuesday, we have Wang Huiyao, who is the president of the Center for China and Globalization, and Pin Ni, who's the president of Wanxiang USA, the largest auto parts manufacturer in the world, talking about strategies, US-China collaboration in the business sphere, and how to navigate this crisis in the economic and business realm. So we hope you'll tune into that as well. I also want to urge you all to sign up and become members at China Institute. You'll get great discounts and access to special programs, etc. But even more importantly, you'll be supporting our work and these events at a time when such dialogue and cross-cultural exchange is really more important than ever. So a little bit just quickly on how this will work today. Our speakers will have a conversation, and then at around 1:40 or so, we will open up to questions from the audience. You will see at the bottom of your screen a raise hand icon, and if you want to ask a question, click on that. Jiayang will tell you when we're opening up to questions from the audience, and Jiayang will then call on you, and you will be unmuted so that you can ask your question. Okay, so today we're turning to something, as James said, that we all love, Chinese food, for a look at how the Chinese restaurant industry is strategizing and striving to survive during this crisis. We have three Chinese food and restaurant experts joining us. Panwen Chen is a former EY accountant from Jiayang province, who now serves as Global Head of Strategy at HungryPanda, which is a rapidly expanding international food delivery service catering to the overseas Chinese audience around the world. Yong Zhao is a former environmental science student turned co-founder and CEO of Junzi Kitchen, who also comes from China's Northeast. And Junzi Kitchen is a rapidly growing chain of fast casual Chinese restaurants serving authentic comfort food, such as wrapped bings and noodles. Our moderator today, Jiayang Fan, is a writer for The New Yorker magazine. She is particularly suited to this conversation because, in her own words, she mostly eats takeout Chinese food, or Asian food anyway, and she frequents almost exclusively Chinese groceries. She recently did a very moving short film about the struggles of Chinese restaurants in Chinatown. So we are delighted to have all three of you join us. Thank you so much. And over to you, Jiayang.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dinda. It's a pleasure to be back at the China Institute, even in these very changed circumstances. I have to admit, this is my third time on Zoom. I feel a lot of pressure to actually be not messing up technologically, and also to feel like I can connect with all of you guys who are listening in. I am a big stickler for actually being able to look at faces. So I apologize in advance if I am particularly, I think, confused by this new format. I am really very excited about the subject of Chinese food and the Chinese food industry in the West. It is a subject that's very dear to my heart. For a number of years, I wrote reviews of restaurants in New York City for the New Yorker magazine, and it was an open secret that I was always trying to find the next great Chinese restaurant. And I think this is what made me a very subpar critic, because I always found Asian food, and most particularly Chinese food, my favorite restaurants, and I don't think that's very judicious if you are trying to be a food critic. Nevertheless, that is my palate. I feel it's a real pleasure today to be on this panel with Rong of Junzi, of which I am a loyal customer and ardent fan, and have been for basically since their opening, and have really watched the business and their offerings grow through time. I've seen HungryPanda around New York City kind of many more times than I think, than I even, I think, consciously can acknowledge, and am so grateful for their offerings to the Chinese diaspora. I think, what they are doing is a huge service for Chinese students, or just anyone from China who are arriving in Western cities, feeling alienated, unmoored, and looking for literally a taste of home and of comfort. So I'm very, very happy to have Panwen on the panel here. I just wanted to start by acknowledging how complicated and exciting the Chinese food industry has been, even prior to definitely prior to the coronavirus crisis. And it is a subject that, it is industry that I followed very keenly for all the reasons that I've mentioned, and that is going through some very dynamic changes, which we'll get into in the conversation later on. And then we also have the unexpected worldwide catastrophe of the coronavirus, and that is causing all kinds of havoc to the world in general, but has a very special and I think particularly convoluted relationship with the Chinese food industry, considering the origins of the crisis. So that's what makes, I think, this conversation particularly fascinating, but also, very, very multifaceted, because there are so many things to be discussed. So I don't want to presume that all of you are familiar with Junzi and Hungry Panda, even though I'm sure many of you are. So if you can bear with me, I'm going to ask both Yong and Panwen to just give us a brief introduction of the business, and for someone who has never heard of Junzi or Hungry Panda, I'm going to ask them to keep it fairly short because there's so much more to discuss. But I think that's where I'm going to start. So without further ado, Yong, can you get us started? Just a concise, pithy intro to Junzi and sort of its place in the Chinese food industry.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the panel. So, Junzi Kitchen is established in 2015. Actually, we started 2014 from a Yale Entrepreneur Institute as like a startup project. So the idea is that basically we find out in New Haven area where at the school, a lot of Chinese restaurant owners want to retire, and there no one want to take over. Their kids that want it, and they're very hard to find new workers because China is no longer that poor. So which means the immigrants as labor get out of China to the U.S. Working the restaurant doesn't work anymore. So a lot of these restaurants are facing the closure just because retirement and lack of labor. Because also Chinese food being perceived as cheap. So which means as a business, you cannot charge a higher price, even their costs getting higher and higher. So this kind of unsustainability of business model make us to think about this is a huge opportunity to start something new as a natural disruption happens. So Junzi basically start to think about the new idea of Chinese food, think about a new brand, trying to feature higher quality food and operations and designs, and also maintain kind of a kind of modern lifestyle, which means fast casual is representing a kind of urbanized lifestyle for the younger generations who really value speed, healthy, and also cultural authenticities. So Junzi started with the ideas, okay, let's create a new fast casual brand, utilize Americans like a form of management and local staff members, but featuring the content actually more authentic and healthy as Chinese modern concept. So that's what we got started in Yale and New Haven, and then expand to New York. Now I have about 5 stores, which is 4 brick and mortar stores and 1 ghost kitchen stores. And currently we're operating 4 of these brick and mortar stores, still operating, deliver food to the customers, to our communities, and also to hospitals. And that's briefly kind of our team is doing. And also we have a new project trying to renovate Chinese Takeout kind of business model as well. So that's kind of additional ones we're trying to figure it out.
And Yong, that's great. Will you just literally in a sentence, just give us sort of maybe 3 of the items on the menu that are your absolute favorites on the Junzi menu, just to give our audience a sense of kind of what makes you salivate on the menu.
So basically the menu we have is a combination. So it's basically you build your own kind of dishes based on rice, noodle bowls, or trimming wraps, which is like a northern Chinese wraps, like burrito-like wrap. So my favorite is always coming to, I like the rice as always. My fried cracker chicken is very spicy, but also very great flavor on it. And also tomato egg pork noodles is also a very traditional Chinese flavors. That's also my the dish I grew up with. Also, trimming is very northern Chinese, which is I grew up eating a lot when I was in a hurry and grab something to go. That's always my favorite dishes. So yeah, we have a lot of these kind of traditional everyday dishes in China that we grew up with.
Terrific. Panwen, so why don't you tell us a little bit about Hungry Panda, and just again a reminder, something just short, but will introduce those of us in the audience who might not be familiar with the brand and its offerings. Though I'm sure only it's necessary for a minority of our listeners. But go ahead.
Of course. So HungryPanda is a specialist online food delivery platform that serves overseas Chinese community. And when I say overseas Chinese community, that includes both the Chinese consumers and the Chinese restaurants and grocery stores. We started our business back in 2017 in Nottingham, UK. And what we found back then is, when it comes to food, the Chinese consumers and Chinese community has a very specific need. They want the authentic flavor and they want the taste from the home. And on top of that, a lot of our users has already got very established user experience from the Chinese delivery services such as Meituan and Ele.me back then. However, the platforms that in the UK was not really meeting their demand for the for authenticity of the food or the user experience and that they are looking for. So that's where HungryPanda comes in, that we're trying to build a delivery service that's familiar to all our users, and more importantly, we provide authentic Chinese food delivery to our users. And that in turn addresses the issues for our restaurant partners as well. We are bringing large number of orders and also the right type of orders for restaurant partners to help them grow. And that's essentially the ethos that the whole company is built on, is to serve the Chinese community, make Chinese business grow in the overseas market, and also help connect all the users that love Chinese food to the right places.
Terrific. That was great, Panwen. I'm not sure if I'm the only person hearing it, but there's a slight echo, I think, on your end, Panwen. Is there anything? Sorry to be live.
Let me try to put on my headphones.
Okay. Yeah, just in case our other listeners are having problems. So I want to go back to you, Yong, and we've chatted a lot over the years about the shape of the Chinese food industry. Junzi is, as you have said, and it's fast casual. It has a different management style. Let's go back for our audience members. Why don't you narrate for us a little bit about a very brief history of how Chinese American food has evolved in this country, and where you think Junzi fits into that picture. So maybe start with the kind of Chinese American, the kind of Chinese food that America has offered and why it has offered that particular kind of cuisine, and then go into how Junzi is different and kind of and how it differentiates itself from the conventional model.
When we get started this project, as my usual kind of behaviors, start a new project as a PhD student, I always study the backgrounds of introductions, writing that thesis part of that. So when we study the history of Chinese food, so the basic start in 150 years ago, when the gold rush happens in America, in the western part of America, especially. So a lot of people came from Canton province to China, to America, to basically replace a lot of laborers. So it started with the Transcontinental Railroad and a lot of Chinatown born. Some people start to work in the restaurants, but until the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Chinese restaurant is not that popular. There are a lot of Chinese not working in the restaurant business, but after the Chinese Exclusion Act, that a lot of Chinese people who stuck in America only can work in the restaurants. So, but in the 1910, about 90% of people of Chinese, 95, work in the restaurant business and the pub laundry business. So at that moment, the famous dish is the chop suey, which is a miscellaneous stuff stir fried together. So an egg foo young, this kind of first generation Chinese dishes were developed basically the beginning of the 20th centuries. So until probably 1950, that this kind of a dishes started to really die down because a lot of people start to figure out this probably not real Chinese dishes, especially after the elite class of the Chinese Kuomintang or Republican parties came to the U.S. after the Civil War China. So they started to bring the new dishes or new ideas about Chinese food. The one important figure is Cecilia Chan, who's currently 100 years old, still living in San Francisco. And we just had a conversation 2 days ago about Chinese food right now in San Francisco have a huge problem. But the moment that the Mandarin she opened kind of changed the era of experiences of Chinese food perceptions. And I think that golden time from the 60s to 80s is where Chinese food is not that much of widespread, but it's high quality. There's a lot of good restaurants. To perceive Chinese food like the Korean food, like today, they're not cheap. But after the 80s, the third wave of Chinese food started to arrive. As a lot of people start open these Chinese takeout restaurants. Cantonese and later Fujianese came from China to basically really open a lot of these family mom and pop stores of the Chinese takeout restaurant. These menus kind of evolved from the chop suey, but into the most recent generation of American Chinese food. The symbolic dishes such as the Untitled Chicken, invented in the 80s, Panda Express, P.F. Chan's, the P.F. Chan's son is owner of, P.F. Chan's, the founder, is also the son of Cecilia Chan. So they are related. They start kind of new generation of Chinese dishes now seen today. But what we call the fourth wave is after 2006, there's a lot of Chinese young students, professionals later came to the U.S. For studies. After China, they be richer, so they can pay more full tuitions for master degrees, for undergrads, for high schools, even younger kids. And they came to U.S. They demand something better. So when they come to see the Chinatown chicken, they're like, "What is that? I don't recognize that. I don't feel the quality, the cheapness is what I want." So all these new generation came to the U.S. trying to crave something new. So Xi'an famous food, that's kind of when they started, just kind of meet the demand of the authentic dishes in New York. So the kids started lining up the door. I was one of them, trying to really crave something authentic flavors at the moment. In 2011, there's nothing. There's basically only the Jiayang chickens at that moment. Right now, after 2015, there's basically a lot of Chinese restaurants started evolved, especially in Flushing, a lot of authentic flavors. You can easily charge more than $50 for Chinese dishes per person. Right now in hot pots, all this stuff. So Chinese food being evolved in the fourth generation of getting more connection with mainland China, what's the Chinese food being developed there. And also because all the messengers came from China and trying to be the foundation of that. So that's what we see from the kind of creation of concept kind of side. So right now in New York, in LA, there is kind of a rise of expansion of Chinese food concept to people's mindset. The xiaolongbao become popular, the dim sum place become popular. There's a lot of stuff like that start getting popular, but hot pot's not yet. But there's more concept kind of getting into the American market. That's kind of a brief history about the Chinese food, but overall, as a business side, currently Chinese food restaurant there's about 46,000 units back in 2016. In most recent years, there's a kind of a slow death declines of Chinese food restaurants. There's about decline of 2,000 locations of 2018. I don't know about the most recent numbers, but it's still growing in more declines. And then that's a slow death because Chinese food being perceived as cheap and they don't have enough labor to run and work in the restaurant anymore. But the most recent data shows a few things. in February when when China has coronavirus, there's huge demand decline of Chinese restaurants of 30%. We saw the decline of a lot of traffics, but also in the meantime, after the virus started breaking out in America, there's actually a huge rise of Chinese food demands.
Right.
So
no, I'm gonna cut it right there. That's
Yep.
great. We're gonna get to coronavirus in a second, but I thought you brought up a really interesting point about your experience when you first arrived in the U.S. and the absence of what you would perceive to be genuine Chinese food, and also encountering things like hot and sour soup, which I actually have never had in China, or like General Tso's chicken, which is not something that I've had in China. I've had things that are similar, but like General Tso's chicken is not something that you would see in every Chinese restaurant in China. So, so Panwen, you are also, what year did you arrive in the U.S.? I mean, in the West?
So I arrived in the UK back in 2009, I think.
2009,
so about 10, 11 years ago.
Right. So I would love, because Hungry Panda, one of the things that one of the distinguishing features of Hungry Panda is that it has a very user-friendly interface for Chinese people who are accustomed to life in China. So I wanted to ask you a little bit to, and Yong, feel free to jump in. Talk. All three of us, have lived in China and really have very vivid memories of what Chinese food in China tastes like. And Chinese American food is kind of a different genre, right? It's even on menus now, you'll see, you'll see the Chinese classics and then, Chinese American food. So, so Panwen, can you give us a sense of, what do you think distinguishes Chinese food in China from Chinese, American or Chinese British, or like Chinese Western food? Can you give us just like a few characteristics of how these two categories are different?
Yeah, I think there are a few things, right? So if you think about, how people eat in China, when they go to restaurants, Chinese food is sharing food, right? So, what we'll do is we'll sit down, we'll order a couple of different dishes, and then we'll order rice, and then we share the food, among everyone sitting at the table. Versus the format normally, if you're going to a Chinese restaurant with, for the better choice word, Western audience, what they would like to do is they order one dish and they order rice to go with it, right? So the format of dining is completely different. And also in some cases, the flavor is totally different as well, right? So, you mentioned hot pot earlier, right? Hot pot is something that's quite special, right? It's very, very, there's a lot of chili in it. It's quite oil heavy, and it's not something that everyone appreciates in the Western world, versus that's something that that's really
we're winning an increasing number of fans. But
exactly.
True.
But you see what I'm referring to is that the flavors that we enjoy sometimes can be dramatically different compared to what the Western society or the Western culture can accept. Some of the ingredients we use, some of the different types of meat we use in our cuisine is not widely accepted. So there's also flavor and ingredients difference as well. And on top of that, I think one thing that I always notice is when I walk into a restaurant in London, for example, there are always two types of menus. One's in English and one is in Chinese. And these two menus are completely different. You have the Chinese menu, which is tailored for people who understand Chinese culture and who read Chinese, and they can pick different cuisines, different dishes from that. And versus the English one is more like a simplified version of that, right? You don't get a complicated dish, on the English menu. And that's one of the things we realized when business started, is that there are all those secrets that's been hidden in the restaurant scene that even sometimes the Chinese can access to as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, that's certainly the case here in the U.S. as well, with the menus. I mean, a lot of the offerings that are in Chinese
Exactly.
are not available to Americans. And in terms of flavor, I mean, if I could generalize most broadly, you know, Chinese can do with you know, spicier flavors. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a walking example of someone who wants it as spicy as it gets, and heavier flavors. Americans sometimes want sweeter. I mean, yeah, like a lot of the Chinese American dishes I've noticed are.
Can I comment that as well?
Yes.
So from my understanding, when we create dishes, we was navigating between traditional Chinese flavors and also American Chinese flavors. Because what we're creating, we're not creating Chinese restaurant. We're not like taking a Chinese restaurant to America. We're creating a new generation of American Chinese food. So we're basically do a Chinesification of American restaurant rather than Americanization of Chinese restaurants. That's where everything gets started. But where we can stop or go, so that kind of the temporary stopping point is very important for us to navigate. So when we try to navigate this point, we want to change perspectives. So we consider American Chinese food as their own entities, is a kind of a remote cousin of Chinese cuisines. So it has been, doesn't have a very close connections or dual connection, bi-direction connections for a while. So if you think about it, in China, you find new regional cuisines. And you kind of, okay, this is regional cuisine, just find out, like, was it Mongolian cuisines or Inner Mongolian cuisines or Xinjiang cuisines? It's kind of cross-cultural cuisines as well. But you can consider one of the Chinese kind of genre of cuisine together. And although it's kind of, it's a mix. So American Chinese cuisine is also that kind of cuisine, is also including, probably you can find Puerto Rican Chinese food, Indian Chinese food. There's a lot of Chinese immigrants in every part of the world can create this kind of a new hybrid of cuisines. So we consider that as a new entities of self. But when we navigate that, so there's a few characteristics of Chinese food in America. You can clearly see that. So first of all, as one of the ethnic food, Chinese food in America has a huge base. So it's one of the largest ethnic cuisines in America. Has a huge amount of restaurants, 46,000 combined, a lot of, probably only Mexican food has a similar scale of that numbers of restaurants and the coverage of the space. And also it's occupy a huge space of vocabularies. So if you talk about Chinese cuisine, you can actually name a lot of different dishes, wonton, this kind of names. But to a lot of cuisine, they don't even have a name. They don't have a proper name for a lot of dishes they can own. So the kind of word vocabulary space is very important to get. But also compared to what the Chinese cuisine being in Chinese memories, that vocabulary is actually very small compared to what's real Chinese cuisine you think it is. So the kind of one of the largest vocabularies of food in America, but also compared to what's real potential is small. So that's kind of interesting position of American Chinese dishes is. And also another important part is that there is kind of a lack of interesting sincerities of Chinese cuisine in America. Because when Chinese cuisine in America created, is not created just because of passion of culinary love. It's created for survival. A lot of Chinese people cooking Chinese food in the restaurants basically think, okay, I don't like the food. It's so rough and just, I don't like it because the flavor is too simple. But the customer want it, so I make for them. But I don't like it anyway. There's a lot of this kind of feelings involved with Chinese cuisine in America, creating these dishes that make Chinese food kind of have a little trouble, because then when Chinese people talk about it, there's always kind of feel, that's not the real thing, right? But itself, it does, its own establishment, is the sweet sour flavor is here. It's not going to move.
No, that's very, I've definitely experienced that. I mean, I find that my experience visiting a Chinese restaurant with like my Chinese friends is different from visiting a Chinese restaurant with my Chinese American friends, and that's different from visiting a Chinese restaurant with my, you know, non-Chinese, non-ethnically Chinese friends. So we can be going to the same restaurant, but sometimes the dishes will be cooked differently to accommodate our tastes, which is really interesting. Now,
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of time, and so I want to turn the conversation a little bit to what's on our minds, the coronavirus pandemic and how it has affected the Chinese restaurant industry. Just as Linda mentioned, I eat almost 95% Chinese food, as anyone on my on Twitter who follows my food overshares will know. And I feel like I have a real attachment to Chinese cuisine. Visiting Chinatown about a month ago was pretty devastating. I mean, this was before, you know, the real lockdown, but business had thinned considerably. And at the time, I didn't want to impose my understanding of what was causing this slowdown in traffic to Chinese restaurants. This was before, you know, COVID had become a huge had become a huge infection risk for the city. And of course, racism and xenophobia have been, you know, are factors that were mentioned again and again. And it was very unfortunate that I won't go into details, but both I and many of my Chinese Asian friends have experienced racism just in the last few weeks in New York. And that does have a relationship to anything and everything associated with Chinese, with the Chinese, which is Chinatown and Chinese food. So, you know, that's, you know, Chinese food is a huge, I mean, that's kind of our soft power, right? Our cultural soft power is our food. So I want to talk about, and maybe I will, you know, pivot to Panwen, and then Yong, you can pick up. You know, how do you feel like how do you feel like the coronavirus epidemic has changed HungryPanda's business and, you know, volume of customers, and what is the nature of the change?
Yeah, sure. So it's quite interesting. So, you know, if you look at the market, there's always a supply side and demand side. And the first thing that the coronavirus has hit was the supply side. So, you know, with the coronavirus, especially in New York, for example, with the ban of in-restaurant dining, a lot of smaller restaurants are not going to be able to operate, you know, with the ban in place, because the online orders that comes through our platform and all other platforms combined are not sufficient for them to survive. So the first thing we're seeing is there's a wave of, you know, close down for a lot of the restaurants. Some of them temporarily, some of them permanently. So there's first that happened, you know, in the past month or so. And then what happened on the second side was, on the demand side, was there is a sharply increasing demand for food delivery services. And that comes from both the, you know, takeaways, i.e. prepared meals, and also grocery deliveries. And you know, although the restaurants are, you know, the supply side is declining, the actual demand, you know, is increasing, you know, sharply. So what that creates is a unique operation challenge for us to actually, you know, use the supply we have to meet the demand. And, you know, we are in a lucky position where, you know, we all have all our management team and our business has a very close, you know, very deep roots and a close connection with China. So before the outbreak even hit the Western world, we know it's going to happen. We kind of knew it's going to happen. So we've been preparing, you know, a lot of plans, you know, put a lot of plans in place, you know, when the outbreak happens, if the cities are shutting down, what do we do, right? You know, because restaurants are going to closing down. And secondly, it's going to be more difficult to hire delivery drivers, because a lot of people will decide to stay at home. So, you know, fewer people will come into the workforce. So what we've done is we hired more drivers, before the outbreak. So even before, back in January, we've extended our delivery driver pool by 10 to 20%. So even nowadays, when there is a reduced, number of drivers available in the market, we're still able to meet the demand. Another thing that's standing out for me is that the grocery demand is increasing, more than sharply. It's exponential at the moment. And whatever grocery stores that's still operating out there, they are going to sell out. For example, the grocery stores we work with on our platform is currently limiting, the number of hours they are operating every day and the number of orders they're taking every day. Just because, otherwise they won't even be able to, do the picking and the packing of the orders and get it shipped. And what we're also doing with that is we are actually working with the grocery stores, and we're actually helping them to connect with the supply chain, right? So, if their currently supplier are not working, we're actually talking to other suppliers to say, look, there is a grocery store here, they still want to operate, can you actually supply them? So we're actually helping them to explore the upstream supply chain to make sure there's enough supply of groceries, the basic, vegetables, fruits, meat, and plus, the dried items, snacks, noodles, rice, etc., to our users, so they can go, get through this extraordinary period of time.
Right. So are you just so I'm understanding you correctly, Panwen? So you were saying that the volume of orders have actually increased since the pandemic has hit in the last month or so?
Correct. That's correct.
And you're okay. That's really interesting. So Yong, I'm going to turn over to you. So for restaurants, I mean, just so everyone knows, I mean, HungryPanda, they have it. I was just exploring the app yesterday. It offers grocery store deliveries, Chinese grocery deliveries, and also restaurants. And as I've learned from the past few weeks, trying to book a slot for a grocery store delivery has been very, very difficult on multiple platforms. But Yong, I wanted to ask you about what it's been like at Junzi. I'm a very frequent visitor to your Columbia University branch, and it's very clean, very sleek, fast casual restaurant. I know that it's no longer it's temporary shut because every dine-in restaurant in New York has been shut. So how have you had to adapt to the virus crisis, and how has it affected the business and customer volume?
Yeah, it's not shut down. It's there. I was there every day.
Oh wait, you can go eat inside?
No, yeah, you can't eat inside, but you can just grab something.
But I'm right. Sorry, correction is you can order out, obviously, but yeah. the dine-in.
Yeah, the only thing you can do is sit down inside. There's no seat. So basically, you grab something to go. You can order that. Yeah.
Right.
But basically, yeah, same that Panwen. Like when we saw what happened in China, we're like contemplating, okay, that thing will happen here. So we see that, okay, what do we do, right? So I think by the beginning of March, we already started to implement reaction plans when a lot of other companies doesn't have it. And we already have the playbooks learned from our Chinese colleagues in China, like how the restaurant been doing and how to react. So that gave us a kind of a heads up. So when the virus started to really have outbreaks, the whole company react pretty swiftly. So we understand there is a kind of two part of challenges. First challenge is a decline of traffic populations. So in Manhattan specifically, and in all the college town we've been successfully locating to, the population is not permanent, it's temporary. There is a travel inside this. They will travel back to the homes. So that seasonality is that even the daily differences is kind of rapidly disrupted. So in Manhattan, for example, there's probably more than 60% of people already left. And there's people who come in every day for work that don't come in anymore. So there are huge empty kind of street spaces. So that's one challenge, is the overall decline of the demands. But also their second thing is about the dislocation of the supply demands. So even for the people who stays, those behavior changed. And this dislocation make a lot of restaurants close down. So 50% of Chinese restaurants closed down in this coronavirus, based on the data shows from the Restaurant Business magazine. A lot of them will not open again just because they don't have the necessary funds and resources to open again. So already in a slow death kind of period, but now it's a kind of the final blow of their destinies. It's more like that. So for us, basically, we're seeing, okay, now because the decline of the supplies and the demand together, so maybe we can still maintain a certain share of our supplies to the demands, but we need kind of reestablish the supply and demand. So right now, the kind of experiences from the store-centric experience into a home refrigerator-centric experiences. So we need to design a product that's great to be in the fridge, and also great to be, work with other things in the fridge. You can make probably a firecracker chicken quesadilla easily, so we can really, in our social media channel, show you how to do it. And I can cook our ingredients with a instant noodles if you want some fresher noodles. So there's those things that you need to really think about the product, and that's home-centric. They're going to people stuck with the other people, and they're going to eat not individually like they work in the office, but now work at home. But also there's demands like hospitals. So we're creating share meal programs so that we can accept donations from the people who want help for our restaurant, be able to donate a meal to the hospitals in a very low price, so that we can maintain the jobs to our team to improve the social stabilities, and in the meantime, to really help the restaurant at the hospital as well. So that kind of one stone kill two birds kind of situation we can create, can reestablish demand supplies. The whole thing doesn't change who's paying, who's working for whom, that kind of thing changed. And also we're creating a decent dining programs to kind of create a more entertaining experiences, like about like foodie, fun, like dining kind of experiences in the weekend. Because you cannot eat instant noodles every day. You're gonna just deliver something to really, for lunches every day. So weekend, you probably want to accelerate a little bit. And then what they do, right? We create kind of remote dining, kind of distant dining experiences, so that there's 3 courses delivered to a home, and then you can do something about it. And then our chef will live stream on our social media, tell you how to deal with the food, tell an interesting story about the dishes. There's the Chinese, we'll create like just this weekend I have Chinese Japanese food, for example. They create 3 dishes about different stories, collaborations. So tell those stories, kind of make you more entertained, and seeing the chef teaching you how to do it. So that's very important too. So we're also probably trying to roll out a virtual restaurant concept that we've been trying to design for a while about the Chinese takeout experiences. So whenever they close down their restaurant, we're actually trying to open a restaurant in 2 weeks. So that's kind of another thing we're trying to do, is a kind of start a company. Fashion is like always trying to be different. So yeah, that's kind of, but overall for the restaurant to respond to this kind of crisis, if you understand it, every crisis is a starting point of a new hope and new opportunities. It's like a forest of fire. So when all the other trees is burned down, there's trees who stay, and also there's seeding who can grow.
Right. So that's a great place for us to that's a great place for us to pause. I feel like we've only just skimmed the surface of this of this subject, and we have so much else to talk about. But I also know that our attendees are very eager with their questions. So I am going to open it up to the attendees who can, if you if you can navigate the Zoom app to raise your hand, you're probably smarter than me, but I'll be able to see you if you are, okay, so, okay, so, so I have a question here. Should I read this, which I think is a smart question. It's from Mei Ying, and for the first one, I'm just going to read aloud the question, and either of you guys can jump in to answer. So Mei Ying writes, I was in New York City, Chinatown a couple days ago, and was sad to see even the popular takeout places, such as the Cantonese barbecue places, were no longer open. This is part of old Chinatown identity. I was curious how the new way of ordering and delivering, such as HungryPanda, will be able to help and reach out to this old establishment, so that it can continue to survive. So the question is, this audience member Mei Ying is sad that these older establishments are not available during this pandemic, and is there anything that HungryPanda can do to help these old establishments, which are maybe not the most tech savvy, to still reach out to evidently very eager eaters. So I'll let you do that, Panwen.
Of course. So I think there are a few things we can do. The first one is, with all our, all the old-fashioned restaurants, what we're doing is we can obviously, provide them with the infrastructure to enable them to do food delivery services and reach to customers. So there is an infrastructure element we do, and that's the the bread and butter of our business. But more importantly, what we can do during the coronavirus period is we're opening up all our channels to promote our restaurants. So we have a lot of strategic deals in place with our media outlets in the US, in New York in particular, and we are selecting and also working with our restaurant partners so that we can create content in the media to promote those restaurants. And we also run either co-invest in some of the promotional activities to drive up the sales and the orders to help them have enough cash in to survive during this period of time as well. And the last thing that we're doing is going back to the infrastructure element. What we are pushing now is something we call in Chinese we call it 美食直通车, which is delicious food express, which is essentially we're trying to extend the delivery range that we're currently in place, in particular in Manhattan, so that we can actually deliver food further with longer miles, so that more people can enjoy food from different restaurants. For example, today we are actually starting to deliver a lot of food from Flushing in Queens to Manhattan, so that people can actually order some really famous and good quality Chinese food in Manhattan from Queens.
And yeah, I mean, I think a question for, I'm doing a little bit of live tweeting here, and many people are really interested in questions about both meal kits and about hot pot delivery. So Yong, why don't you tell us a little bit about meal kits? Because I think that's maybe a concept that's not the most familiar. Like, how long would it take to assemble? What is the price point? And what is it? And can you order just for one person or for an individual? So if you could efficiently take us through sort of this concept of meal kits at Junzi, that would be great.
Sure. So basically, meal kit is created based on this a la carte of items, because we basically customize Chinese food for you to assemble a bowl for you, right? But if you don't need to eat that bowl right now, which is mostly you're stuck at home and you want to put in a few portion of food in your fridge, it's not necessary to put everything together. And then when you reheat it, it's really hard to reheat it. So basically, we create kind of a larger portions, larger containers of these different ingredients from our lines to be able to put in your fridge. So you can do combinations. You can put together as simple as possible delicious sesame noodles. So those kind of what we're trying to create. And then you can also order by basic items at different prices. But overall, it's around the between $10 to $15 per person kind of price you want to have. But if you really can combine with other dishes you have in the fridge, like you have some noodles, you can put your own noodles, and that's much cheaper. So we create probably you only buy some firecracker chicken to really boost the flavors of your dishes. So this could create a huge amount of freedoms for you to create, because when you don't have the coronavirus stuck home situation, when at work, you have no time to really play with it. You just want to get a bowl and to be done with it. But now you have all the time you have, and you can really start experimenting a lot of things, and you want more freedoms. So that's what we're creating family meal kits for. And also hot pots kind of kits, a bit different. So that's kind of similar to our decent dining experiences, because when you order hot pots, you want, okay, that's kind of a established ceremony of something. You want to put the stuff in it. It's not like as easy to put instant noodles anymore or frozen dumplings. So a lot of hot pot dishes, they create a lot of containers, a lot of the procedures make you feel that's a thing. It's like a discounted restaurant experience, but still a good experience of eating hot pots with your family members together. Of course, Haidilao also created kind of single person portions if you really have sad life, but it's not bad as well. A fancier version of instant noodles I was created for. So yeah, I eat a lot of those hot pots as well. But it's basically what we call like a fresh refrigerator-centric concepts that now everybody can have, and that will last for a while. It's not going to be around coronavirus, but also after coronavirus for about even 6 months, 1 year, it can be like that. People are going to eat a lot at home, and they're not afraid of cooking themselves, of slight cookings.
Got it. Panwen, so one of the things, we talked about before this discussion was how, I'm someone who eats hot pot on almost a weekly basis, and I can't, I did not know it was possible to get hot pot on delivery, because, it's usually I'm a single person who, and hot pot is, first of all, not really a one person kind of a meal, and I've never known that it could be delivered. So tell me about how Hungry, and usually on Seamless or on Uber Eats, hot pot is not an option. So tell me about HungryPanda and how, do you guys offer hot pot for delivery?
Yeah, we do. We certainly do, and it's quite an experience actually. So take an example, right? You order a hot pot from Haidilao, which you mentioned, or some other merchants and restaurant partners that we have on our platform. What you get is you need to order the actual pot itself for about $3 or something like that, which comes in this size. So it's about I think 6 to 8 in diameter. There's a little hot pot. It comes with comes with a kind of lit gel type of fuel. So it goes below the pot, and then you can just use that. And all the food will be packaged and delivered to you with the soup base itself. So you just pour the base in, you add a bit of hot water, and all the ingredients are laid around it, and it's all in a packaged in one package. And the good thing is, obviously, the pot itself, it will cost more than $3 itself. But once you've ordered it once, you can always reuse that pot, in the next round. So it's investment that our restaurant partners and we are making, so that you can order a hot pot in the future.
That's terrific, and that makes me really excited. About how, how the Chinese food industry is going to evolve through this crisis. Of course, as we all know, many jobs are being lost. Many small businesses are struggling to survive, and sometimes I have a hard time finding the silver lining in such a in a catastrophe of this epic scale. But talking to you guys have made me realize that even though pandemic is not something we've ever asked for, it is inviting new opportunities for Chinese food as both a business and a cuisine to be reinvented and as a business model for it to be rethought. So for that, I am grateful. So on that note, I'm going to bring back Dinda, who has some concluding remarks, and it has just been wonderful to be a part of this panel. And I know it was really short. I at least felt like I could have spent 3 more hours discussing Chinese food, but I'm very, very grateful for all of you guys who were able to tune in from home. Dinda, over to you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to thank you. I agree, this is way too short. I want to thank all 3 of you so much for an amazing conversation, extremely nutritious. We've heard, all about the history of Chinese food in America and in the West, the sociology of Chinese food, the people earlier in America, for example, who had to make food they didn't like with lack of sincerity because they needed to survive. We've learned about the secrets of Chinese and English menus, which is fascinating. And you've really told us a story of survival. And I want to thank you especially for injecting a note of hope in this conversation, that you're finding ways to survive and ways to navigate. And Jiayang, when you said that every crisis brings new hope, I think that's something that we all want to take away from this. So I urge everybody to go out there and support your Chinese restaurants as much as you possibly can. And I want to thank the audience so much for joining. It's such a thrill to be able to do this online. Please do consider signing up as members of China Institute and join us again next week for another riveting conversation next Tuesday. So thank you again so much. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.